There's a popular saying in the chess world, e4 is best by test. And truly, for anyone who's been around chess long enough, it's hard to disagree. The move e4 has given rise to some of the most fascinating battles in the history of the game. It opens the board, it invites creativity, and it brings fire to the center. Of all the openings that begin with e4, few have stood the test of time quite like the Ruy Lopez. For centuries, from the dusty boards of 16th century Spain to the digital arenas of modern online tournaments, the Ruy Lopez has remained a weapon of choice for players who understand that chess is not just about moves, but about ideas. It's a dance of control, pressure, and timeless strategy. The Ruy Lopez begins with a simple sequence that almost feels poetic in its symmetry. White begins with e4, opening lines and staking a claim in the center. Black responds with e5, meeting the challenge head-on. Then comes knight f3, attacking the pawn on e5, and black develops knight c6, defending it, and then bishop b5. That single bishop move, sliding out from c4's shadow to pin the knight on c6, marks the birth of one of the most classical openings in chess history. At first glance, it might not look dangerous. A bishop attacking a knight. What's so special about that? But beneath that quiet surface lies an ocean of ideas that have shaped chess for over 400 years. Named after Ruy Lopez de Segura, a Spanish priest and one of the earliest chess theorists, this opening has been studied, debated, and reinvented by generations of masters. It was Ruy Lopez who, back in the 16th century, wrote about this opening in his book Libro de la Invención Liberal y Arte del Juego del Ajedrez, long before computers ever existed. And his insights still hold relevance today. The Ruy Lopez is that deep. But as rich as it is strategically, it is also home to some of the sneakiest, most devastating traps in chess. The kind that make your opponent's jaw drop when they realize they've walked right into them. Some of these traps have earned legendary status. Names like the fishing pole trap, the Mortimer trap, and the Noah's Ark trap. Each of them has its own story, its own flavor, and its own victims, from beginners to masters who blinked just once too long. Let's start with one that's almost poetic in how deceptive it is, the fishing pole trap. It's a favorite of blitz players everywhere. You'll find it in online games, club matches, and casual encounters between friends who think they're just playing a quiet Ruy Lopez. It begins with the Berlin defense, which has become famous in its own right thanks to its use by world champions like Vladimir Kramnik and Magnus Carlsen. The Berlin is often considered a solid, drawish line, but here, it hides a weapon that's anything but calm. White begins with e4, black responds e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez, and then comes knight f6, signaling the Berlin defense. White castles, and then comes the surprising knight g4. At this point, most players stop and stare. Wait, what's this knight doing? It's moved twice already, which goes against classical principles. Shouldn't black be developing other pieces first? This is where the psychology of the trap begins. Most players think they can simply push the knight back with h3. After all, it's just sitting there menacingly near the king side, but then comes the thunderbolt h5. And that right there is the moment when confusion sets in. Many white players think, let's just take it. So they capture with h takes g4, thinking they're gaining a free piece. But what they've actually done is open the gates to their own king. After h takes g4, black responds h takes g4, and suddenly the h file is wide open, the g4 pawn is gone, and white's knight on f3 is under attack. When the knight retreats, black's queen swings out to h4, threatening checkmate on h1, and within moments, chaos erupts. What looked like a harmless knight hop has turned into a full-blown kingside assault. It's called the fishing pole trap for a reason. The knight on g4 is the bait, h5 is the line, and white's greed is the bite. And once you fall for it, there's no getting out. The hook is set. What makes the fishing pole trap so effective isn't just the tactics, it's the psychology. In fast games, players rely heavily on intuition, and when they see something that violates the rules of good chess, like moving a knight twice early in the opening, they instinctively try to punish it. The problem is that chess isn't just about rules, it's about ideas. And this particular idea turns white's good intentions into a disaster. If you think only amateurs fall for such traps, think again. Even strong players have found themselves staring at their screens in disbelief after realizing that a simple pawn push like h3 was the start of their undoing. And that's what makes the fishing pole trap timeless. It plays on instinct, on the human need to correct what looks wrong, and in doing so, it lures its victims in perfectly. But the Ruy Lopez has many faces, and not all its traps are based on flashy checkmates. Some are subtler, psychological masterpieces designed to bait the opponent into overconfidence. That's where the Mortimer trap comes in. Unlike the fishing pole, which is fast and violent, the Mortimer trap is quiet, cunning, and slow. It doesn't promise an instant kill. Instead, it whispers to you, making you believe you're in control, until suddenly you realize you've walked into a net from which you can't escape. It begins with the same familiar Ruy Lopez structure: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and then knight f6. But instead of the usual moves like a 6 or d6, black plays something that looks completely harmless: knight e7. At first glance, this move seems absurd. Why block your bishop on f8? Why retreat a knight that's already well placed in the center? To most players, it screams inaccuracy. And that's precisely the beauty of it, because when your opponent underestimates you, they start to relax, and that's when they make mistakes. White grabs the pawn on e5, thinking black has simply forgotten about it. But that capture is exactly what black is waiting for. Black immediately strikes with c6, hitting the bishop on b5 and opening lines. White retreats the bishop to a4, trying to stay safe, but now the real point is revealed. Black plays queen to a 5 check, and suddenly the position changes completely. The check forks the king and the knight on a5. White is forced to respond, but there's no way to save everything. The knight that just won a pawn is now doomed, and black emerges with extra material and active pieces. What looked like a harmless pawn grab turns out to be a carefully prepared trap, where one tempo too many is all black needs to punish white's greed. The Mortimer trap works because it preys on one of the most dangerous emotions in chess: arrogance. The moment you think your opponent has made a weak move, your guard drops. You stop calculating deeply, you start assuming, and in chess, assumptions are deadly. The Mortimer trap has claimed countless victims in online games, and even some tournament ones because it looks so innocent. Players can't resist the urge to punish the move knight e7, and by the time they realize their mistake, it's too late. While the Mortimer trap lures you quietly, the Noah's Ark trap is pure poetic justice. It's probably the most famous of the Ruy Lopez traps, one that every chess player has either fallen for or dreamed of setting. It's named after Noah's Ark for a reason. The pawns move in such a way that they literally build a cage around white's bishop, leaving it stranded and helpless. The shape of the pawns, a 6, b5, c5, and c4, resembles the sides of an arc curving around the trapped bishop on b3. And just like that, a once powerful bishop becomes a prisoner. The story of the Noah's Ark trap begins in familiar territory: e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, and then d6. Everything looks standard so far. But then comes the temptation. White pushes d4, eager to break open the center. At first glance, it looks like a bold, principled move. Control the center, open lines, and punish slow play, right? But in this position, it's a mistake. Black immediately responds with b5, chasing the bishop, and after bishop b3 comes the stunning knight takes d4. If white captures back with knight takes d4, black responds, pawn takes d4, and suddenly the e-file is open, the center is collapsing, and there's danger brewing. But the real trap comes when white, feeling clever, plays queen takes d4, trying to recover the pawn. That's when black plays c5, and everything falls apart. The queen is attacked and must move, but wherever it goes, the bishop on b3 is doomed. The pawns on b5, c5, and a 6 form a perfect prison, and when c4 lands, there's no escape. The bishop that once cut across the board now sits trapped behind enemy lines, watching helplessly as the game slips away. What makes the Noah's Ark trap so iconic is not just the beauty of its geometry, it's the lesson it teaches. Avoiding these traps isn't about memorizing hundreds of moves. It's about developing an awareness of why the traps work in the first place. The fishing pole punishes impulsive attacks on an apparently misplaced piece. The Mortimer punishes greed and underestimation. The Noah's Ark punishes impatience and overextension. In every case, the theme is the same. Your opponent gives you something that looks free, and in your eagerness to take it, you lose everything. To protect yourself, you must think before reacting. Ask yourself why your opponent played that strange move. What are they threatening? What will happen if I take this piece? These small moments of reflection are what separate strong players from impulsive ones. And once you start recognizing traps for what they are, psychological tricks hidden behind logical moves, you begin to play with more clarity and calm. The Ruy Lopez remains one of the most beloved openings in the game because it's both classical and full of surprises. You can play it safely, building up slow pressure and positional advantages, or you can dive into tactical chaos with traps like these. And in either case, it continues to teach players one of the most important lessons in chess, which is that patience and understanding always win over impulse and greed. If you've enjoyed learning about these timeless traps and the stories behind them, make sure to follow at Chess for Sharks for more creative chess content. We bring you not just openings and tricks, but the life, art, and culture of the game.